Welcome to ATARC's Thursday After Lunch IT webinar series. For those of you who do not know me, my name is Jonathan Albaum, and I am the Principal Digital Strategist for the federal government at ServiceNow. Today I'm going to be taking over for Tom Suter and moderating this afternoon's panel. This afternoon we're going to cover a framework for dealing with a crisis, very much like what we're all experiencing with COVID-19. We have two great CIOs to share their perspectives and experiences with us. Keith Bluestein from the U.S. Small Business Administration, and Michael Anthony from the National Transportation Safety Board. Michael and Keith are going to go in depth about the changes and innovations that they've incorporated into their agencies and how they plan to make the actions that they've taken part of their way of doing business going forward. We're also going to dive into some lessons learned, some challenges that they faced, and what they see next for the future of work. So welcome to all of our attendees. I also want to, as we get started, I want to thank the ATARC team and Connie Coleman, my ServiceNow colleague, for making today's event possible. So just for a format, we're going to have a brief introduction by our panelists, and then we're going to talk together about these topics, and followed by some Q&A from our audience. So I hope you have some good questions. Please share them if you do. We're going to have some poll questions in there to spur the dialogue as well. I'm going to begin by sharing just a couple of slides to frame the conversation. So when the pandemic hit, I think a lot of organizations that I worked with and that I was interacting with at the time, they were very much in a response mode. Everything was happening at once, and there was really a need to be able to keep employees working, make sure they were safe, and continue the mission in the best way possible. And it was very rapid kind of change. We were working very quickly to make things happen overnight. We bought a lot of hardware, we bought a lot of software. We did what we needed to do to keep things going. And it was maybe a bumpy 4 or 5 weeks for some, implementing new technologies and new program requirements. But things stabilized over time. And a lot of organizations and CIOs that I've interacted with, they've taken these new technologies they purchased, and the changes that were introduced, the innovations, and they're really focused on baking them into their organizations. So there's a long-term state of readiness. So whatever happens next, whatever that next crisis is, we're able to react. We're not focused on just reacting. We're not focused on responding. We're ready for what comes. We can maintain our productivity in a time of crisis, which leads to this idea of very long-term digitally resilient organizations that are unimpacted by external changes like a pandemic, a hurricane, some other kind of unique event that causes outages for some. Those digitally resilient organizations, because they've truly embraced digital transformation, are able to continue to operate. And that's where a lot of these conversations are leading us following the pandemic. We've had a clarion call for digital transformation, I believe, and we're seeing that in a lot of ways. And Michael and Keith are going to share some interesting stories during our presentation today, I think. And as we hear their stories and we think about our own experiences, the concept of platforms, I think, always seems to come back. And this idea of platform as a service was something that I dealt with a lot and built when I was a CIO myself in government for a number of years. But as I've left government and interacted with more and more organizations, I really think about platform as a strategy for long-term success, and it really applies in this case as we implement platforms, especially as we think about disruptions. We're positioning ourselves to think about our business as end-to-end digital workflows, where the work and the data flow irrespective of what's happening, which really empowers the whole organization to be successful, to think about work and data flows and drive to great experiences. That means there's automation. By default, there has to be data integration because so many times we're working across systems. The consistent experiences, the ability to collaborate effectively, those are core components of modern user experiences, technologies, expectations following COVID. And, overall, I think the environment, drives greater interoperability, greater flexibility, more visibility as we adopt platforms and think about our organizations as these very interconnected things. And for a moment, I just want to talk about workflow and how we think about it at ServiceNow. We think that behind every great experience is a great workflow. And for ServiceNow, that always begins with the ServiceNow platform. The ServiceNow platform is the core to everything that we do at ServiceNow. The workflows that ServiceNow for, IT workflows around IT service management or IT operations management, HR workflows for employee experiences or customer workflows, or even the ability to build custom workflows, they all reside on top of the ServiceNow platform. That is the core of this company. At its heart, ServiceNow is a platform company, a platform for workflow. We just happen to be very successful building IT workflows in the beginning of our company's history, and sometimes we're known as an IT company, but there's so much more there. And what makes the ServiceNow platform unique in a lot of ways, it's one database, it's one architecture, it's one thing. All of the capabilities that we're known for exist in that one place. In addition, there's very strong integration capabilities across all of the core systems an agency uses. The core data an agency uses is, typically locked away in these sometimes legacy systems of record. The ability to integrate that data and leverage that data via workflow to drive mission outcomes is something that ServiceNow really excels at, and results in us thinking about ServiceNow as the platform of platforms for digital workflows. In addition, ServiceNow integrates very nicely with the tools people use to interact in their day-to-day work, the conversational tools, the web tools, mobile devices. And oftentimes people are interacting with ServiceNow, they don't even know it. They're just interacting through a web browser or email, and they're getting service. So I find in my experience that really cuts down on the unstructured collaboration and the silos in organizations. And we've made big investments as a company over the past several years to do all this in our government community cloud that's at a FedRAMP level high, FedRAMP high, impact level 4 in the DoD space. So we care about the security of that data, and we understand its importance inside an agency. So it's the idea that moving from that quick response that we had when COVID hit to being ready for what comes next, and long-term digital resiliency requires platforms. ServiceNow is perfectly positioned in many organizations to serve as that foundational platform to drive that integrated experience that we need as there's more and more uncertainty in our environment. So that was a little bit of framing for today's conversation. I want to give both Keith and Michael a chance to introduce themselves now and a little bit of their initial perspective, and then we'll get into some Q&A. So I'm going to turn to Keith first. And Keith, if you can go ahead and talk a little bit about your background, your experience with COVID, and how things are going at SBA. I know our audience would love to hear that.
Well, thanks for that intro, Jonathan. Keith Bluestein. I'm currently the CIO at the Small Business Administration. I joined here just a few months after we started going through the COVID-19 response in June. Prior to that, I spent 3.5 years at NASA delivering services, overseeing their service delivery at NASA. Prior to that, I was actually back at the Small Business Administration as the Deputy CIO, and prior to that, I was the CIO for a lot of the classified community within the Department of Navy. So come through a variety of different backgrounds in there, and the opportunity to come into SBA was tremendous. At the time, there's a great deal of focus on what SBA was delivering to Main Street America through the Paycheck Protection Program, through the Economic Injury Disaster Loan Assistance Program. So it was vital assistance that we were delivering to mainstream. We were already in a posture where we were trying to deliver mobility. I think that's one of the things that we've been trying to do all across government for a period of time, is give people the opportunity to work where they want to work, when they want to work. So Jonathan brought up a great discussion about, what we do as CIOs and how we plan for those kinds of things. And a lot of times we have this long horizon out there. We want to do things in a logical fashion so that we don't interfere with the operations of our customers. And then every once in a while you have something that comes up that suddenly that horizon gets pulled in very, very tight. You need to do that now. And so that's kind of where we are with SBA. We were already making the transition to do a lot of online collaboration. We were switching from a Skype platform to a Teams platform to do collaboration. So I joined right when we were in the middle of that. So it was kind of half and half. And my challenge was to sit there and try to make that a little bit more homogenous so that our agency could collaborate better. And the big thing through all of this, the pandemic and our response to it has been collaboration and cooperation across not just our agency, but with other agencies as well. So that's a brief introduction to me, and I'll turn it back to Jonathan.
Keith, you joined post-pandemic. It had started, right? And SBA had a lot of responsibility in those early days, and I know you'll talk about that in a moment. Let's turn to Michael now. Michael, you joined the day of the pandemic, was that right?
Yeah, the day we sent everybody home.
It was your first day at NTSB.
Correct.
So please introduce yourself and give us a little bit of your background.
Hey, thanks for that, Jonathan, and good afternoon, everyone. I am Mike Anthony, really happy to be here. I look forward to today's dialogue. I am the CIO of the National Transportation Safety Board. We're a small, independent federal agency charged with improving the public safety of commercial transportation. And for those of you who are not aware, what does that mean? Well, if there's a major accident involving aviation, which includes space, maritime, rail, highway, even hazardous materials and pipeline, there's a good chance we'll be investigating it. Before moving forward, like Keith, I'd like to share a little bit of my background. From 2015 to 2020, I was with the IRS. I served in several executive roles, most recently leading a data solutions organization in a large business and international division. Without being too specifics, I'll just say we leverage data to identify where we would focus our limited resources. Part of that, I spent a significant amount of time leading our external facing identity access and management program. And what does that mean for each and every one of you? If you have an irs.gov account, about 20 million businesses and individuals have these high assurance level accounts. Most likely you went through one of the systems I had an opportunity to manage and deploy. Prior to working for Treasurer, I was with DoD and spent the bulk of my career in the Army's research and development community. So I had an opportunity to spend 6 months in both Iraq and 6 months in Afghanistan. Really gave me an opportunity to make an impact, closer to the field. And I want to share that with you because most of my experience has been in large, complex organizations servicing millions of individuals, and that brings us back to the NTSB. I did join on March 16th. So that was the same day we gave everybody the pretty much orders to implement Max Telework. And I've been reflecting over the last 6 months, and my biggest adjustment hasn't been Max Telework. It hasn't been managing and delivering on commitments in a virtual environment. It hasn't been engaging with our leadership, my peers, my staff, or even external stakeholders. I think it's been adjusting to a small organization. And while that could be a topic for a future date, I'll just share one example. While I have all the traditional CIO roles, I also have the responsibility for managing our privacy, our records management, and our FOIA programs, all of which could have potentially been impacted by the Max Telework environment. So I want to share a couple of positive things that occurred before I joined the organization, but really, I want to take my hat off to the folks who really worked hard. The NTSB had planned and implemented a major, I'll say, improvement to their network. Not only did we significantly increase the bandwidth, reduce single points of failure, we also implemented a zero trust network access capability or software-defined perimeter. That replaced our VPN. And while I don't have data at my fingertips, I suspect that network improvement alone probably reduced our trouble tickets by 50%. and probably improve customer satisfaction by 100%. We did have collaboration tools like Teams and the GoToMeeting, GoToWebinar suite, but right after the pandemic hit, there was our customers really wanted Zoom. So we were able to pivot pretty quickly and acquire Zoom for external engagement in less than a month. So I think that's another example of just listening to customers and being able to act quickly. And it probably is easier in a smaller agency than in a much larger environment. So you really have to balance that expectations, I should say. We also expanded service desk hours. Having max telework, more flexible work schedules, we expanded the hours by about 2 hours in the morning and 2 hours in the evening, so we could really, support our customers. And we have folks from Alaska to the East Coast, so I think that really helped. I'll turn it back to you, Jonathan. I know we're going to go through some stuff and share some experiences.
Well, I think that's been it's a great intro from both Michael and Keith, and thanks for helping to further set the tone for this conversation. What I find really interesting is you both inherited operations during a period of great external change, and you sometimes you don't get to choose your team, you don't get to choose the situation, and this is the case for each of you. So when you look at the environment, and I think you both inherited pretty good environments from what I understand. What changes do you feel like you need to make going forward in order to make the max telework, to make the expectations around customer service that you're learning to, Mike, work under any circumstance? Because I know in both your agencies a lot was done very quickly to keep things moving. Well, how do you make those changes stick, really embed them in the organization? And then sometimes when you work really fast, you can create some blind spots, or you can put something that'll work under initial conditions, but over time it might not be scalable or stable. How do you ensure you're ready for what comes next? Because we don't know what's coming next, but it's going to be challenging. I could expect that. So Keith and Michael, why don't you just add on to that, and Keith, please jump in after.
Yeah, I'll say, as we procure, hardware like laptops, I think we're thinking much more about cameras, docking stations, port replicators, monitors. How do we enable our employees to work, physically in an office and at home and be productive? I think at the end of the day, I'm not sure if we'll go back to the same 9-to-5 environment for all employees. So how do we, enable our employees with devices? And for those employees that are back in the office, how do we ensure our conference rooms and collaboration environments are set up so that they can be in person and virtual, some sort of hybrid environment, so that we can be as productive as possible? I mean, I'm personally a fan of whiteboards and marking things up, and I'm not 100% sure. I think the tools might be there, but I'm not 100% sure people are comfortable yet working in that environment, and maybe that requires some training and familiarization and just time to get there. I think those are the things that jump up to me.
How about you, Keith?
It's kind of interesting. I want to go back to explain a little bit of one of the things that happened in our agency as well, because we are responsible for some of the major things that came out of COVID-19, such as the expansion of business loans to Main Street America and other businesses out there. We expanded the size of our agency, expanded almost by a factor of 4, almost overnight. So what would be normal processes suddenly, to your point, expanded quite rapidly. And we were very fortunate to get White House support that reached into industry and said, hey, support SBA in any way you can to get these resources in there. So we got, laptops and other devices that were able to expand, and we were able to bring people on board rapidly. But the thing you brought up about, okay, now you've expanded. This is almost like you pulled on a rubber band. We've expanded and everything's under tension. What happens when you relax that, or what do we do to sustain that in the long term? And that's, of course, the challenge that we have when we come in here is, okay, so what are we going to do now that we've expanded by a factor of 4? At some point, ostensibly, that's going to contract a little bit, and it really kind of pushes us, for those of us that were kind of more physical or logical at that point in time, getting to the point where you can do these things digitally to expand and come back, which is, one of the things talking about the advantages of a platform. Can you actually have that capability? So what we're trying to do right now is almost like backfill. Now that we know we're here, how do you backfill to make sure that you have that infrastructure that is elastic and resilient, so that, okay, when this comes down, if we do have some major event like a hurricane or something in the future, how do you expand rapidly again so that we're not kind of going through a lot of the lessons learned in here? So
yeah, platforms are a way to do that, because they do, you're starting at the 50-yard line. You're not building from scratch, so you can theoretically bring things up faster, scale down.
no, that's a great thing, so platform is something you jump off of, right? And if you have a really solid platform, and I will tell you, I don't have that. I'm looking to build that in SBA, but previously we had used ServiceNow as a platform. You can build a lot of stuff off of that very quickly because you already have the foundation.
Well, yeah, we're irrespective of the platform you choose, I think the concepts are really important, that, you don't have to start from scratch, and, in a time of a crisis, and you have to, rapidly do something, or you have to automate in a way, because, suddenly people can't go into an office. You don't have time to do the nuts and bolts core development for a new application. Why not use something that's already built? But you have to have these things pre-positioned. You can't stand up the platform. So it now is a time, I think, to do a lot of planning. In a related sense, Michael, I want to ask you about your perspective on the future of work. We were chatting a little bit before. You had indicated, telework is here to stay, but maybe not full-time telework in perpetuity, I think. How do you see that evolving at your agency?
Yeah, a couple of quick things I want to add. Keith, love to hear how you manage property effectively in a virtual environment, especially a lot of new property. But something else I want to say, we've been able to maintain our really important operations, like these congressionally mandated board meetings. We review major accidents. We propose safety recommendations. I think we may have been one of the first agencies to hold hearings like this virtually. I'm kind of interested to see how we move forward when we return into the office, because we realize cost savings not having to fly a significant amount of individuals into DC for a meeting. So that those might be some sort of virtual, in-person and hybrid events. I also think about, if I've had staff and others inquire, since folks have been relatively productive during the pandemic, is there a need to go back into the office? And while we'll certainly follow, agency guidance, I think, first of all, I don't know if this is a perfect example, because there's not a lot of other things individuals have been able to do outside of work. But I also, I wonder about the camaraderie, spirit to core, onboarding new employees. How do you kind of build that environment as successfully in a virtual
Culture,
environment?
right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I'm actually interested in what some of the folks who are tuning in today think about that, because at the end of the day, I don't know if there's a right or wrong. I think it's what's the best we can do given the circumstances, and approach it in I'll say a logical fashion.
Now, Keith, you've been going into the office. I think I've seen you in your office a couple of times, and you have such a cool looking office. I thought it was a Zoom background the first time I saw it. But what does the future of work look like at SBA?
Well, you bring up a great point in that in the past, I think we were moving towards mobile, or being more mobile, and allowing people the flexibility for remote. And of course, COVID kind of forced that function, right? Not can you do it? Now we know we can do it. And so I think, to Michael's point, now we're starting to have the discussions, okay, how do we want to do that? So when you go back, I think for SBA, it certainly highlighted in a lot of cases that, look, we can still function, certainly the agency functions we can still do. But one of the things that we've seen, especially in our LA regional office and other large regional offices, is that lot of small businesses still came into our offices there to have that one-on-one conversation. So even though our agency functions remotely, they still have to go out and touch Main Street America and the business owners out there. So how that changes, that's an opportunity, I think, for us to sit there and, okay, can you have a digital storefront more like not that you would be able to do an Amazon-like storefront for SBA, but I think that we are taking a look at, okay, what is that mix? We've got people in our Denver office that have not been in the office in 6 months. Everything has been functioning like almost like nothing ever changed. But going forward, do we really need to sit there and have that office space, or can we determine which functions can continue?
So you both bring up excellent points, Michael, on culture and camaraderie. And, I personally like going into an office. I liked interacting with my colleagues. I learned a lot, when I went to grab a cup of coffee and hear from people, especially, when I first joined ServiceNow, and that's how I learned a lot about the company. So, you do miss that in bringing people on in this sort of remote way, really is a call for some sort of automation around onboarding and also offboarding. I think important, functions to digitize. But at the same time, we pay a lot for that office space and a lot for that ability to have grab a cup of coffee with your colleagues. So, I think there are some tough questions coming up, but we'll get those, and there'll be agency guidance as you alluded to, Mike. But where I want to kind of turn the conversation, and then we'll do a poll question after, is building up what Keith, you just stated. You have a kind of retail-like business at times where you have people coming in and they want to transact one-on-one with the person. And I'm not surprised that there are some people that still want to do that, because that's what they're most accustomed to. But I think a lot of us are getting, our thought patterns are changing and our experiences are changing, that we expect everything to be digital and on our terms. And I should be able to do that work with the SBA, or if I used to work at USDA, that farmer should be able to do the work with USDA on their terms at their time when they want to do it. And that's not just a Microsoft Teams front end to a conversation with the federal employee and DocuSign for a signature, but let me do it when I'm free, when it makes. So what's the changing expectation for how your agencies, maybe for SBA more so, how you deliver service, but also for, as Mike stated, providing information to the public and having in-person meetings. So if you have to predict, 6 months, a year, 2 years from now, what does that look like for you guys?
Well, I'll jump in there first. I certainly, without a doubt, believe there'll be more digital engagement. And quite frankly, I hope there'll be more, policies, federal regulations that enable that. And I really encourage not only federal employees and industry, but also our citizens to be open to change. I think, as you alluded to, Jonathan, there's going to be probably more flexibility. And I think that's an opportunity we should really embrace. Certainly not in the same position as Keith with the service centers throughout the country. I was with the IRS, but I would just ask people to manage your expectations too. And as I said earlier, for a large organization, it's gonna take a little bit longer to really change both process, policies, and culture than maybe a smaller organization that can pivot, have a little bit more agility. So kind of from my perspective, interested in Keith's thoughts.
I think it's pretty fascinating when nobody gets enamored by laws, but we passed the IDEA Act a couple of years ago, and the real intent behind that at the time was that, okay, let's do better engagement. Let's improve the engagement between the citizen and their government. And so part of the whole thing, when you sit there and kind of decompose that down, was into, okay, how do we, have a better digital experience, and how do we sit there and make that experience better? So when you sit there and start taking a look at that, I think a lot of us, like myself, when that was passed, was like, oh, here are the things that I need to do. Here's what the law mandates. But I hadn't necessarily taken a look at it from, if you will, the citizen standpoint, or even from how do I engage from a government standpoint with the citizen. And I think that's what this has really helped us do, as Michael's alluding to there, is that, look, there's kind of something in between, and there's probably no one size fits all, but we do need to sit there and come up with, how do you better engage with the citizens? Is that a digital thing, or are you going to continue to have some retail contact? I think you are. And to Jonathan's point, I think that, there's a reason that Amazon has bought some office space recently. I can't remember one of the other large organizations, that people are still going to be going into office spaces, because I believe, even if you can't quantify it, that people do have, there is some benefit to having interaction one-on-one. So as much as this has been great and kind of pushing us to think about how do you sit there and deliver these things, especially in a technology age, I think we still have to include that human element. And how much of that is that personal contact? I don't know that there's a bright line between that and what we do digitally or with technology.
So there's a lot to chew on there. I'm going to come back to that in a second. I'm going to ask, we can put up our first poll, because it ties really directly to how people are thinking about returning into an office at some point, and or continuing telework. So Alyssa, if you could put up our poll. So if you've been working remotely, how do you feel? How effective do you think you've been? And what's the right amount of remote work? I'm interested to see what people say here, and we'll get the poll results in a couple of minutes. I want to just build on what Keith was just noting there, that I think, in my experience, you have to be able to meet people where they are, which means you have to understand your customer, and you have to understand your work and your agency, your organization. You have to understand how the work flows and how the data flows. And once you understand that, there's probably a couple of approaches. And in the olden days, which was 6 months ago, sometimes we talk about we have to keep that office open. We want to build something that's online, but we got to keep that office open, because that's the minimum expectation. And I think that to serve people, I think we're kind of evolving, as you stated, Keith. We're going to have to be able to provide a digital option for every core service, everything that you could do in person. Well, there has to be a digital option now, because not having a digital option means, well, that individual's got to go into that office, and there's risk with that. What if they have a pre-existing condition, or they can't go because of other externalities? So curious what you guys think about the need to have a digital alternative for every process, and if that comes to pass, how do you get there? So Keith, why don't you do that, and we can talk about the poll results.
It kind of goes to, and this may not sound too exciting, but sometimes you really kind of have to understand, what are you doing? What are your processes, and what is the business that you're actually transacting? And is that even possible that you could do that digitally? So use an example. If I'm going to make a pasta dinner, I could sit there and talk about making the pasta dinner, but it's not going to taste very good if I'm just trying to do that digitally. So there are certain things that I'm going to have to continue to do a certain way. But part of this, again, is taking a look at that. And one of the things we do as CIOs a lot of times, take a look at what are we doing overall, and how do we break that down? And are there areas that we can either find efficiencies that we can convert to digital? How would we sit there, and do we do all digital? Or to your point, do we sit there and continue to offer some analog options for that as well? Because there's always going to be a portion of the population that wants to do things kind of the old school way. And if you listen to Simon Sinek, when he talks about the people that are on the trailing edge of technology adoption, there's people out there that if they hadn't been forced to get off a dial telephone, they would have never gotten off a dial telephone. So
Yeah. But Keith, just because you could go 100% digital doesn't mean you should. But I think we need to enable our processes so that they can be accomplished from anywhere, and perhaps on any device. I'll even take an example internally. Quite frankly, we hadn't fully implemented electronic signatures. And then we sent everybody home, and people are like, how are they going to sign things? And they don't have printers and fax machines. And it's like, well, why don't we just use the tools we already have? And it was just a matter of, it was a forcing function for us to do something that enabled our workforce to do things. Now they can continue that on, whether they're in person or at home. So I kind of agree completely with what you said.
Yeah. So let's take a look at the poll result that we just got. And the first question was, how effective do you think it's been working in the office, working at home rather than the office? and only 6% said less, and about 20% said it was the same, which means the vast majority of our audience thinks they're much more effective at home. And that's interesting because these are people who work in your organizations, and they might not want to come back, or there may be some degradation in their productivity, possibly, returning. And I think the second question is even more illuminating. What's the right percentage of in-person and in office and at home? 75% seems to be the winner. So that's interesting. I would have said 50-50 myself, but at that, 4 days a week at home, some organizations are going to that. And curious your reactions and how you guys are both managers and supervisors, leaders in your organizations. Can you envision a time where it's that kind of workforce?
Yeah, I've heard a few people say, so coming into the organization and really enabling everybody to use the technologies we had. Everyone joined every meeting with the cameras on. There were no concerns, no issues. I heard some managers say they've seen their employees more now than they did back in the environment where everybody was in the office. So I think some agencies haven't even turned their cameras on yet. So I mean, I think it all depends on the environment, but quite frankly, I don't know if you really need to be in person to have the interaction. I personally prefer it, and I'm starting to think I'm a dinosaur. I like to read body language, and you can't always read it from here up. But I think at the end of the day, I kind of find poll results interesting, and I'm going to take this back to my leadership and share with them, because at the end of the day, I think it's more about getting the job done and doing quality work, and perhaps less about where you're doing it.
Yeah, work is what you do, not where you are. I've heard that. I appreciate that mostly, I'll say. Keith, what do you think?
Yeah, I think it's kind of, the polling results are kind of interesting. I think, to me, as of course, as senior managers in government, one of the things that makes you do is really kind of check your assumptions. I came into the job with certain sets of assumptions. And even with the polls, like, okay, well, here's the assumption I make, and here's what I think I'm seeing. But when you start talking to your employees, you find out they're looking at things a lot differently. And I think that's part of the challenge going forward, is if we have that dialogue, I think there's just going to be some mix. And I think maybe it's almost like a shifting of a tectonic plate, where people had a certain approach to what are we going to do for remote. COVID forced us to sit there and rethink that a little bit now. And I think that going forward, I think maybe we'll have a little more open mind about that. But I think that you do have to sit there, and if you are taking a position, one size fits all, a policy or whatever, that you kind of ask, what are the underlying assumptions in there? And is that something that the majority of your workforce is really subscribing to?
So we're getting some questions. We're going to turn to those in a moment. I want to just get your perspective on, let's assume that we head back, even if at 25%, per the poll. How do you bring back those workers in a safe way? It's easy to send people home. It's not so easy, I think, to bring them back in safely. What are your organizations thinking about from a safe return to work perspective?
So go ahead, Keith.
Yeah, I was going to say, because of the number of offices we had a whole rolling plan. They had to clean spaces to CDC guidelines, and they went through all that. And okay, here's your inventory, and it's done. But the challenge with that is that as people have come, and we're at up to 25% can come back, and we're not forcing anyone to come back, is that if somebody goes in and then suddenly they get flagged as possibly exposed, now you're going through that process again. So part of this is just having a level of assurance for the employees coming back that the environment has been prepared appropriately, but then also making sure that people have to operate in a way that, look, you're not coming in and creating super spreader events or something in your office space. That's a challenge.
Michael?
Yeah, I would agree. I think most federal agencies, if not all of them, that kind of have a phased approach to returning. Obviously the appropriate, cleaning of facilities, hand sanitizer, masks, all other things that are recommended. I actually think this would be a good topic in a couple of months to talk about, as more and more individuals go back to the workforce. And I think, as Keith alluded to, one size doesn't fit all. There are going to be certain cases where we're going to take special precautions. I don't, I think as we start to reintegrate, it'll only be a portion of the workforce per day. It's not going to be everybody on that day. And that's why I talked a little bit about hybrid conference rooms, because we're really maybe not going to have that entire opportunity when everyone's in the same room to really brainstorm through something. So how do we maximize the in-person and the remote? And I'm not sure if I have a solution for that, but if anyone's tuning in does, I'd be happy to hear about it.
Yeah, well, we're gonna turn to the questions in a moment, so maybe we can get some comments on that too. I think that you're both bringing up good, points, and underlying all that, you have to maintain now this, Mike, to your point, a digital infrastructure that supports this hybrid approach to conference rooms, to brainstorming. Which is, might be new, certainly different, but it's going to be something you have to pay for in addition to the office space that the people are in. So, there is more as federal agencies you're paying for from either digital infrastructure or physical infrastructure perspective than you did beforehand. So you have some increased costs there, the hardware, software, all these things. So that's going to have to be part of this conversation at some point too. So the management tools for those things are obviously very important. And similarly, it strikes me that something you said, Mike, I think, Mike, that you have, it's not one size fits all, and it certainly isn't that way for employees. Some people have children at home because daycare is closed. Some people have pre-existing condition perhaps, and they can't just come in. So I've seen and certainly been an advocate for doing some kind of employee sentiment survey to understand where people are, so you can treat them respectfully and bring them, keep them, engaged. Someone who's worried about going to the office because they're going to get sick probably isn't going to do their best work in the office. So I hope you guys can, your agencies are considering, those things, the soft stuff, in addition to the health screening, the PPE management you might have to do, or maintaining a physical distance. So
if I can piggyback on that, it's kind of interesting because several years ago people started talking about the whole person concept, and traditionally we've looked at it. I'm an employer, you're an employee. Here's what I'm going to tell you to do, and I expect you to kind of do that. But I think that we've evolved where you really have to look at each individual in totality. What is their total situation? And we've done that even with bringing back up to 25% of the people. We recognize people that have compromised people in their household, et cetera. You have to take all that into account.
Yeah, again, it's very easy to send them home. It's hard to bring them back. And I just hope that as you're both advocates inside your agencies, that we don't rush to do it in a way that creates more risk for our federal employees and others. So you have it's a big responsibility you all have there on top of everything else that you're doing. So
Hey, Jonathan.
Yeah, go ahead.
Looking at one other thing.
Yeah, please.
As we, as an agency, have to launch to certain accidents, major accidents, if you will, we developed an assessment tool, leveraging some of the data sets by CDC and others as a data point for an area we might have to launch to. What is our risk tolerance level, and are the employees comfortable with, the investigators comfortable with it? So it's kind of one factor in the equation. But at the end of the day, you know what I mean? I think there's some maybe other tools we can use to assess risk, not from a technical perspective, more from a health and safety perspective. And, and I like your idea of the employee sentiment survey.
Yeah, no, I think it's, one thing that I, when I share that, I think about people remember how they're treated in a situation like this, and the fact that you care about them is going to go a long way to their long-term desire to stay at your agencies or your organizations. It does not just government. This is employee-employee relationship in general. So I think it's an interesting idea for people to chew on. We do have a couple interesting questions. We have about 15 minutes left. I want to pivot here. So one question we have is on network security. Have you had to rethink any aspects of how you secure your networks? Do you foresee having to make any changes in the future? Michael?
I'll say Still being relatively new to the organization, I'll just say the area that, and it's probably true in almost any federal organization, but we'll see. Um, I was a little bit surprised. We have a ways to go to really document everything and keep it up to date. And as we add a new capability of the environment, update our system security plans and the entire, trail associated with that. So I guess what I'm attempting to do is really baseline where we're at, so I can really assess the progress we're making, against our own identified deficiencies and perhaps others identified by outsiders. But that's kind of where I'm at. We're certainly not in an environment where we're dealing in a multi-level classified environment, so we certainly don't have some of those challenges other agencies might have.
Mhm.
But quite frankly, as we have more and more cloud-based capabilities, just ensuring we have the appropriate records management policies up to date. People
Right.
are sharing everything. People are storing everything in the cloud now. It's backed up, but it's not on the hard drives, or maybe it's in both. And if there's a Freedom of Information Act request, how do we access that information and make sure we can, do what we need to do?
Understanding what and where your data is hard under the best of circumstances, let alone the very changing environment. Um, Keith, for security, it's got to be on your mind at SBA. You have a lot of personal information about business employers, employees, employers.
Yeah, it's been an interesting challenge. So to Michael's point, yeah, we had actually moved a lot of our security into, if you will, virtual or cloud-based capabilities. So we were able to scale when it came to your everyday operations. The challenge that we had was, as we expanded our footprint, especially to do these large loan programs, we were bringing in other vendors to assist with that workload. And to your point, it's one thing for us to have done all the homework and figured out, okay, here's where our data is, here's the boundaries we're putting on there so that we know where it is and who can come in and get it. But when we sit there and go to other cloud vendors and they've provisioned, especially in the commercial space, things that they're going to be able to deliver quickly and reliably, and they don't necessarily always have the same concerns that we had. So when all of a sudden you're introducing that into your environment, it's posed some challenges for us in working in these relationships with them, that when we find out that, well, we don't really want to have that posture. If you're transacting our data for us, here's the posture we need. And so kind of brokering some of that with some of our third-party vendors has been a challenge.
Well, and by third-party vendors, maybe you mean the banks too, right? Because when the payroll protection plan started, you were relying on commercial banks to interact with SBA systems and people, and there's a lot of data that flows. There's fraud concerns. There's that happened overnight. This change. So it's not simple. So being ready for whatever that next one is, or Congress can enact a new program you have to manage. So taking the time to develop those relationships and nurture them when you don't need them is also, I think part of the story too.
It's a great point. And of course, we were talking earlier where that's one of the things we're kind of catching up, recognizing that, okay, maybe we weren't where we wanted to be at the start, but kind of developing that relationship so that going forward in any future thing that you've got that there. And even the conversations we had with Congress about that, they recognize that that's a risk. We're asking you to do this overnight, but they expect us to work towards a better posture.
Yeah. Related to these changes, Keith, you talked about having to scale up very fast. Maybe some of that, a little bit of that happened before you arrived, but there's an elastic nature to the work now. What do you think SBA needs to do to become sufficiently elastic? What features do you need in your platform technologies that you want so you can scale? What does that look like?
Well, so of course, the first answer is always, go to the cloud, right? It offers all of those things, but OMB came back, originally they had cloud first, and then they said, well, cloud smart. And part of that's where we're looking at is like, look, I think that we've learned a lot of lessons on how you expand. And now we're taking a look at, okay, how can we sit there and make that something that's like an accordion where it's supposed to expand and contract and expand and contract. And so we're kind of learning some lessons here that I think will set us up for the future. And then additionally, one of the things that I've done, or we're in the process of doing right now, is really taking an end-to-end look in the agency of, how do you do your business? And are there ways to sit there and harmonize all of these things? Because we have different kind of siloed activities that we're not optimized. So if you're really trying to expand rapidly, having something that's kind of going back to the platform discussion, having something that's uniform across the board, that really enables you to expand and contract realistically.
Mike, what would you like to add there?
Yeah, I think we should leverage this as a forcing function and opportunity. Simple things like we would get mobile devices and laptops in, and we do work on them. We provision them. How do we just work with our vendors and have them drop shipped right to the employee's house? And then they use that box, and we give them a prepaid label, and they ship the old device back to us, so we have accountability of everything. That reduces a lot of touch labor on our part, but it just maybe took the event to have us shift our thinking a little bit. There's other things as well, like we've been working towards implementing a complete software-based VoIP environment. Well, now we're already in that environment. People aren't used to using their phones anymore, and it's going to be a lot easier to continue on with that, right, as we reintegrate. So
I mean, cost savings, to pay for new requirements, perhaps.
Yeah. So I think it's kind of like using this and building upon momentum. There was one thing I was going to share with everybody. So there's been a lot less travel, so there's been less accidents. What our investigators have been able to do is pivot towards older cases that they had the time to work through. So now that's kind of increased the amount of dockets and other things we're releasing and pushing out to the public. But at the end of the day, during that poll question, I think we've been the same or even more productive. It's just kind of almost rethinking what are our priorities and what do we need to get done. And again, it's going to be different for every organization. But I've been pretty impressed with our workforce and how they've been able to pivot to other work that is just as meaningful. It just hadn't been as much of a priority.
So, that is, I think that's a really fascinating outcome. There's a lot of unexpected, unintended consequences from this, positive things at times. So, you're sharing one that I had not thought of, and perhaps others hadn't considered. So, there's a silver lining, I guess, in some ways, if good data comes out of those investigations that makes us safer overall as things return to normal. There's one additional question that we have, and I want to expand on it a little bit. It's around RPA technology, and do you see RPA technology playing a role as we begin to rethink what how we do our work? And I would expand it, just say, are there other emerging technologies, new capabilities that the momentum you've both described, we're now ready to venture and try and do something with a new technology set and an emerging technology that maybe we would not have otherwise? Michael or Keith, be interested to hear from you. Both of you on it.
I observed a lot more RPA activity over in the Treasury Department at some of the different bureaus, including the IRS. I think from an NTSB perspective, we were already along our way on a journey on an enterprise case management environment, and now we're finally bringing in the last group. So we've pretty much aligned across the board on one enterprise case management environment, which I think for any agency is a big ever if they've been historically using multiple different things. So my hope is that we can take this opportunity and build on that, and hook in where possible, build upon it, but continue to leverage that so our investigators can do their jobs wherever they're at. And I know we have the network in place. I know we have the virtual collaboration tools. I think focusing on data and how we really exploit the data, that's probably going to be the challenge for myself and our organization over the next few years.
Keith, what do you think?
Yeah, for us, there's a couple of elements on there. One of the first things we're taking a look at is like, hey, is there something you can do with RPA to alleviate some of the workload, if you will, for your workforce? This became very, very evident in the areas of disaster assistance, who were handling all the economic injury disaster loan requests. that expanded significantly. And so we threw a lot of humans at that. We had the luxury of being able to bring humans into the process, but going forward, a lot of the activity that's in there, especially if we have the processes mapped out, that lends itself to chat bots and some other technologies that people are using out there, so that if you have to expand up, I don't necessarily have to bring the human component to that. I can sit there and use
But
technology.
you do need to do the work to understand how the data flows, how the work flows through the organization, the different systems you touch, different organizations role in something. And, you know, my experience through my IT careers is always a little more complicated than people think, you know, than it is. And if you don't take the time to really think out that process, that's where you go wrong. It's rarely the technology that's the hard part. It's the process, and then the change management that comes with the new process. So I think those are, you know, big challenges for you know, for all of us as we move forward. I'm going to ask. We have about 4 or 5 minutes left. I'm going to ask for our second poll question to come up, and we're going to use that as a way to conclude here. So, how confident are you in your agency's ability to embrace digital modernization efforts going forward? And then how are you satisfied are you with your agency's COVID-19 response? If we can have those poll answer the results up in a moment, I'd like to, you know, use those as a way to close. And you know, Mike, if you can begin sharing your perspective on, you know, those questions, your ability to keep the momentum, and then, you know, your COVID-19 response, and, you know, how do you move forward to improve in thinking about bringing people back and eventually, you know, being in truly, you know, a new normal.
Yeah, listen, I am very confident that we'll be able to continue on this journey. I honestly, I've been really impressed with the organization's response to COVID. I mean, we're a safety organization, so I think that goes without saying. You know, I think there's some unknowns out there. You know, quite frankly, we're in an election year. We'll be under continuing resolutions. The federal budget's very large. I'm not sure what that's going to mean for federal agencies moving forward. So there might be, you know, the intent to want to move faster and forward digitally, but I'm not 100% sure there'll be funding to do that.
Right.
I think, you know what I mean? So I think there's a lot of unknowns, so we're just going to have to manage people's expectations here. We can move only as fast as, or, you know, with the velocity as the resources allow us to.
Yeah, and, you know, if you see the poll results, people are 50% are extremely confident or very confident that their agency will push forward with their modernization efforts and be successful. And, you know, most are satisfied or very satisfied with COVID-19 response. So at least that, you know, I see that and I think, well, the work you're doing has, you know, the momentum is there, and you have a good, great foundation to build on to, you know, to be successful. So, you know, Keith, what are your final thoughts as we conclude? If you can go ahead and bring us home here.
Yeah. Well, I think that this all does, you know, the whole discussion today talks about, you know, there are many of us that wanted to do certain things, or we had a vision for the future. And, you know, they always say, don't let a crisis go to waste. Well, we had a crisis that really forced us to do a lot of things, maybe faster than we'd like to do, but it gave us a great opportunity. And to Michael's point, I think it's one of those things, there's an intensity right now to get some of this stuff done. And we want to seize that and try to move some of this stuff forward. But as we all know, especially for those of us that have kind of worked in the Washington, D.C. environment, depending on what's going on, there's a lot of things that are going on in the entire ecosystem that, you know, could suddenly shift focus onto certain other things. You know, if a vaccine comes out and suddenly, you know, the focus on the pandemic actually subsides, and then we have some other activity going on, this is going to be kind of an ephemeral moment that I think most of us need to seize and to try to make those big moves so that you have momentum going forward, so that people do keep that intensity regardless of what happens with, you know, the external environment. I think we're in good shape, that we have great leadership that is really pushing us hard to realize that it's more than just a legacy. It's what we owe the American taxpayer and the small business owner out there. But, you know, where we do that across the government, I think it's a great opportunity right now.
Well, Keith, you have my vote if you were running. Great way to conclude it. I can't imagine anybody doesn't agree that these things have huge importance because they do affect our citizens and our country's ability to be successful now and well into the future. So that's a great way to conclude our session. And to everybody, thank you for joining our presentation today. We're at our end, but I do want to invite you to join ATARC next week, September 22nd, for an informative Zero Trust Summit. This summit is going to consist of 3 panels that explore zero trust security, focuses on policy realignment and identity management. It's going to be great. I hope you can join us. And just want to conclude again by saying thank you for being here today, and we hope to see you next week. Have a great rest of your day. Bye.
Thank you.